Hello, everybody. My name is Caitlin Marino, and on behalf of the First Fridays Committee and the Ask Department, welcome to Virtual First Fridays. These presentations will also be posted later on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel. So if you have any computer issues or have to leave early, you should be able to access these within the next few weeks. First Fridays is a monthly series of presentations made possible by a generous gift from Governor Elmer L. Anderson and Mrs. Eleanor Anderson in honor of former library director Dr. Edward B. Stanford. The presentations are based on materials in the University of Libraries, Archives, and Special Collections. And a special thank you to Alan and Dave from Middle English Interpreting, who will be providing American Sign Language interpretation for today's presentation. We plan to continue offering this service in the future. If you have any questions for our speaker today, you should submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A function and not the chat box, just because it can get pretty confusing if they're in both places. You can submit your questions at any time, but we will hold them until the end of the presentation. Our first presentation today is from Lisa von Drasek, curator of the Children's Literature Research Collections, and is titled Vera B. Williams, Activist, Writer, and Artist. And now I will turn this over to Lisa.
Put your hat on, honey. I'm gonna ask Mimi to come and sing Bread and Roses with me. As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, a thousand mill lofts gray, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses, as we go.
Here we are. I'm Lisa von Drasek. I'm the curator of children's literature at the Children's Literature Research Collections. And there's a reason we played that little clip of Joan Baez singing Bread and Roses, and it will become apparent sooner rather than later. But first, let me acknowledge that these Minnesota lands that we choose to call home, on which we work, which we choose to call home and on which we work, are the illegally occupied lands of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe peoples. We acknowledge that the United States government failed to uphold the treaties with the sovereign indigenous Dakota Nation, which made it possible to found our university through the Morrell Land Grant Act. We respect the current vibrant indigenous cultures. So Vera B. Williams, she's an activist, author, and artist. She died at age 88 as an award-winning children's author and illustrator. Her books are known for their cultural, racial, and socioeconomic diversity. Williams wrote or illustrated 16 books, including A Chair for My Mother and More, Said the Baby, both which earned a Caldecott honor. Virginia Duncan, her last editor at Green Willow Books, said her books were full of exuberance and respect for children. She loved making books, and that love comes out of the pages. Her texts emphasize the joy that is found in ordinary activities, flying a kite, making music, eating a meal. Her illustrations are known for their bold colors and a style reminiscent of folk art. They were praised by reviewers for their great tenderness and crackling vitality. Vera B. Williams' books validate children's lived experiences, model how children can live their lives as activists standing up for what's right. They instill empathy and they encourage children to name injustice wherever they see it, persevere, and build community. Her first book, and I'm going to let you know what's going to happen, is I'm going to talk a little bit about her books, and then I'm going to go into her life and how that informed her art. Hooray for Me was by Remy Charlotte and Lillian Moore, the poet Lillian Moore, and the paintings were by Vera B. Williams. In her very first book, you can recognize the use of color, the lettering, the exuberance, and those borders, which will come up again and again. Her first book that she wrote and illustrated herself was It's a Gingerbread House. Bake it, build it, eat it. It was a story and a how-to, and that'll come up again and again. And she said, I made this story to keep myself company after my children were grown, and there wasn't anyone around to make gingerbread houses for. And when you take a look at this art, it's not that familiar. You don't go, oh, that's Vera B. Williams. But why does it look so different? Pre-separated art. During this period of time, artists had to make 3 kinds of layers to create the art. And if you want to know more about pre-separated art, you can look on the Curlin website for a digital exhibit which tells you about this artistic process. Her second book was Ostrich Feathers by Barbara Brenner. And you see again, it's that pre-separated art, it's the layers of colors. And then the next one she did on her own in 1980 was The Great Watermelon Birthday. And fortunately for Vera B. Williams, the use of pre-separated art was fading away. So she didn't like doing it. Let's just say that. She didn't like doing it. But you can see the community, 100 children eating watermelon at this birthday party. And she said she wrote this in Toronto because she lived near a 24-hour fruit market. And it was such a diverse group of people she wanted to describe, the beginning of every book being memoir to Vera. 3 Days on a River in a Red Canoe in 1981, also it started as memoir for herself. Many wonderful canoe trips, 500 miles she went on the river. She lost the first illustrations when they were almost complete, so this entire book was the second set. And again, you're not really that familiar. It's not looking like who we know Vera B. Williams to be. In fact, look at those fish, those naturalist illustrations, but we can see they're the border, the common white sucker. And then she burst onto the scene, nationally known, in 1982 with A Chair for My Mother. Translated into many languages, speaking to many kinds of people. It's a story of Rosa and her mother. Her mother's a waitress, she's tired at the end of the day, and she doesn't have a comfortable chair to sit in. And it is about self-reliance, but also relying on your community. It's has heavy subject matter, there's a fire, there's a, a way of looking at the world that we hadn't seen before in children's picture books. The second in the Rosa series is a quartet. In 1983, Vera wrote in the Curling Collection edition, I think this book reflects the time in my life when I made it and my effort to choose and establish my own career. Music, music for everyone, part of that. And then Cherries and Cherry Pits. She goes in a different direction, but still telling her own story, her own life. And this is about Bidemi. And she refers to the time when she wrote her own stories as a child and drew her own pictures and how that was honored in her family and her circle of friends. In this book, it's watercolor and the characters' art is made with magic markers. Bidemi lives on the floor above me. We visit back and forth a lot. Bidemi loves to draw, so when she opens the door, I'm often standing there with a marker of some kind or color she hasn't had yet. And here we see Vera's watercolors and Bidemi's, Vera channeling Bidemi's pictures, and the border is subway cars. Stringbean's trip to the Shining Sea was done with her daughter, Jennifer Williams. And as a teacher, librarian, this is my go-to book for writing with kids. Who doesn't want to make postcards? And here you see from within the book, it is the perfect mentor text. And A Chair for Always was the last of the quartet. And I'm going to take this moment to thank Vera's editors, Susan Hirschman, the founder of Green Willow Books, and Virginia Duncan, who was her next editor at Green Willow, and the art directors, Ava Weiss and Sylvia LaFlock, because picture books are not a solo activity, it's a team effort. And all of these people inform the work. I had the good fortune to be working at Morrow Books, Green Willow, when more said the baby came out and won a Caldecott honor. Little Pumpkin. Now this is Little Pumpkin. Little Pumpkin scoots away so fast. Little Pumpkin's grandma has to run like anything just to catch that baby up. Scooter is a fictionalized memoir of her life in Housing Project. Lucky's song addresses the needs and the wonder and the happiness of being a 4-year-old. Amber was brave, Essie was smart. I'm going to talk a lot about that later. So the story of Amber and Essie told here in Poems and Pictures by Vera B. Williams. Green Willow, 2001. And her last book was Home at Last. She collaborated with Chris Roshka, Caldecott winning artist. In 2017, it was published after her death. Vera was born in New York City in 1927. She recalled that her father was passionate about history. My sister and I walked with him all over New York City. We paused on bridges to watch the tugboats while he recounted the events such as the Great Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And if you don't recall that incident in United States history, there was a fire in the tenements, the factory, and 141 people died either within because the owners locked them in during the day, and women were falling from windows and the streets were filled with bodies. As a child, she understood the true meaning of Labor Day. Labor Day was about livable wages, job security, safety on the job. And if you were injured on the job, you were taken care of. Williams said of her childhood, "I was not protected from real life dramas of heroism or villainy. As a child of active leftists, my sister Naomi and I were exposed to the many stories of our nation that were not our own." A child of immigrants, growing up during the Depression, Williams experienced homelessness, food insecurity, foster care, as well as spending a year in a Jewish home for children, and a time when her father was incarcerated. In many of her interviews and speeches, Vera mentions the influence of having the Bronx house, a settlement house across the street from the housing project where she lived. It was there she received her left wing education, as well as learned to dance, to sing, to play music, and of course, paint. These are pictures from that settlement house of that era by Roman Vishniak. And Vera and her sister Naomi had art that was part of the WPA project that was an exhibit of children's art at the Museum of Modern Art, both when they were 8 and 9 years old. And Vera won a prize, and she actually had to explain to Eleanor Roosevelt what a yenta was. In 1945, Vera moved to North Carolina to attend Black Mountain College, and there she studied graphic arts under Joseph Albers. And I spelled his name wrong, sorry. Influential teacher, writer, painter, and color theorist. She also met her future husband, architect Paul Williams, there. And here he is helping to build a geodesic dome under the direction of Buckminster Fuller. If you want to know more about Black Mountain College, there is tons of books. There are great websites. There's a great museum, an archive. But what I really want to emphasize is that it was a progressive school in which actually the students didn't have to go to class. Art was an integral part of all curriculum. They grew their own food. They built their own housing. They shared the food with the community. They experimented. They had many guest artists and professors from all over the world. This is an example of a building that the students built for their science classes. And the professors were committed to social justice, desegregation, racial inclusion, and racial equity. And here are some of the very famous names. Jacob Lawrence taught there. John Cage, Merce Cunningham was a student and a teacher. Robert Rauschenberg. And the thing to think about in all of this is that when you do the research in Black Mountain College, Vera's name comes up only in, for the most part, in relationship to her husband, who is an architect. So I'm going to highlight Ruth Asawa because you might know her work, because recently the United States government highlighted it in a suite of stamps. So she was a contemporary at Black Mountain. In the movie Fully Awake, Black Mountain College, Vera Williams said, "I'm 79 now, and I was 18 when I went there. So it was a long time ago, and you would never forget it." There's an article written after Black Mountain College. Where did these people go? And Paul Williams, who had received an inheritance, and Vera Baker Williams formed an intentional community within commuting distance of New York City. It was called the Gate Hill Cooperative Community, and it was referred to as the Land. and it included John Cage, the musician, and Potters, MC Richards. And this community was an experiment in integrating art and life and family. And you think about it, it sounds very hippie, but it was in 1954. And when I think, oh, they built their own housing, I never imagined that this was the kind of housing they were building. And in this picture, it shows you how they lived together, but also experimented with housing on the land. Soon after, the Barker School was founded as a free school and modeled on A.S. Neill's Summerhill. And if you don't know about his work, he felt and had written about children's innate learning and wanting to learn, and they would read and they would do math and they would find out these things that they needed to have in the world through their own internal motivation. And part of it was John Dewey, but a lot of it had to do with free being. We will learn from our environment and what is accessible to us. This became the Colleberg School, and officially, Vera taught art and social studies, and Paul taught shop. And here's the staff listing, and you see he was the shop teacher, and it says she was the art teacher. And there's Vera at that time and her husband teaching shop. I think the reason that it's shop in quotes is they did a lot of found art and found electronics and built things from that. And the best part about being a teacher in a progressive school like that is your children can go. So in this tree are her children, Merce Williams and Jenny Williams. Vera wrote about her life during these years. At various times, I have helped start cooperative housing community, an alternative school, a peace center, a bakery where young people would work. I have worked to end nuclear power and weapons and for women's rights. I have demonstrated and I have been jailed. I've produced posters, leaflets, magazine covers, drawings, paintings, short stories, poems, as well as books. In 1970, Vera and her husband separated and she went to Canada and lived on a houseboat and worked in a school as a baker and as a teacher. And she was 46 years old when she illustrated her first children's book. Remy Charlotte at the time was a very famous children's book writer and illustrator, and his most famous book is Fortunately. Unfortunately, I fell out of an airplane. Fortunately, he had a parachute, and he needed somebody to illustrate a book that he wrote with Lillian Moore. Fortunately, Remy Charlotte was the dance teacher at the Holleberg School. So he reached out to Vera, and this is her first book, Hooray for Me. The left was the first edition. The other image is from the Tricycle Press reprint. And these are not in the right order. So I'm going to go here. Some writers teach us craft. Some writers inspire us. Vera B. Williams does both. As part of celebrating her wonderful life and career, we want to take another look at her lovely stories and her busy life. One of the many remarkable things about her books is that they erupt from the activities of her life. And the first book that she wrote and illustrated herself was The Gingerbread House. And it was when she was at the Everdale School. And what I liked is that in another formation, it is still in existence. And it is, quote, the smallest schoolroom and the largest schoolyard. I am neither a writer who became an illustrator or an illustrator who became a writer. But I think from the time that I could hold anything in my hand that made marks and could talk, I did both of those things. And if we're going to look at a theme of Vera B. Williams and her work, it's community. And she was a feminist. And as we examine her work through Black Mountain, the Colleberg School, Everdale, she grew as a feminist who worked for peace, justice, and equality. I just want to remind everybody what was going on in children's books during the year that A Chair for My Mother came out. These are lovely books. Miss Rumphius, I loved Miss Rumphius. When I was young in the mountains, I was a bookseller during these years. Tana Hoban just killed me. I loved the books, but there was nothing like A Chair for My Mother, which became a Reading Rainbow book, which got a Caldecott honor. And you can see the original art in the Curlin collection. You could see the watercolor, you could see the sketches, you can see the pencil lines and the weight of the paper. One of her best love stories grew out of her experience growing up in a family that didn't have a lot of in a family that had a lot of trouble making a living. She never forgot that. The Green Willow publicity, you can find it online, has a video of her talking about how hard her mother worked, just like Rose's mother's. And she actually did buy herself a chair so she would have a place to sit when she was tired. And this is a screenshot from that video. It's under Harper. Just Google Vera B. Williams, Harper, and you'll find it. Williams said, "I'm very proud of having introduced a kind of character and family and experiences to children's books. People who work for a living in very ordinary professions." And I remind you that Rose's mother was a waitress. Phyllis Roop from the MFA program at Hamlin says, "One of the many things I love about Vera B. Williams is how both her work and her life celebrate everyday people, working class people, people with problems, family, community." And these are the Rosa books, finishing with A Chair for Always. Book list, Eileen Cooper said, for A Chair for Always. In both art and text, Williams presents just right Rosa, who captures the intensity children feel about what's important in their lives. Vera never forgot what it was like to be a child, to want, to need, and the transformation that happens when they are listened to. And I want to talk about her being a writer. This is the door to the subway. This is the man leaning on the door. His face is a nice face, but it is also not nice. He has a fat wrinkle on his forehead. It's like my mother's wrinkle. It's from worrying and worrying, my mother says. We know Vera's voice. And in her studio, painting Lucky Song. The love and life and joy that define Vera as a person are reflected in her books, and vice versa. Whatever she did, wherever she was, Vera was totally there in radiant full color. Her editor, Susan Hirschman at Green Willow. I never knew where her books and her life diverged. They seemed one and the same to me, each filled with a commitment to humanity, particularly children, to all that is good and true, and to her family. She loved her work with all her heart, and that love is apparent in each glowing page of her books. Leonard Marcus, critic, scholar, reviewer, said, "If I ran the circus, I would have given the Newbery Medal to Vera B. Williams for Scooter. I find the voice of the first person narrator utterly convincing, feisty, funny, down to earth, and true. This is the cover of the paperback. And this is a manuscript page from the Curling collection. Look at that. And it's the best thing ever to be able to show kids the process that Vera went through in editing her writing. It's messy business. And again, Green Willow Books created an oversized volume, a memoir that is not only physically beautiful, but expressed Vera's life, her poetry, and her narrative. Let's move on to Amber was smart and Essie was brave. Susan Kuklin recalled, Vera wrote the original poems for Amber was smart and Essie was brave on paper napkins. She showed them to me all crumpled up with some with coffee and jam stains. What do you think of these? She asked, handing over the carefully ordered pile. They were exquisite. It's a book. It's perfect. A big Vera Williams smile filled her face. I think so too. Vera knew what she was about. Artist, writer, defender of children, pleasure seeker, passionate human being. And if you don't know Susan Kuklin, please go find her work. She also is an activist, writer, and an amazing photographer. And if I ran the circus, Amber was brave and Essie was smart would have won the Newbery that year. It is a fictionalized memoir of two latchkey sisters whose mother worked long hours because their father was in jail. Amber was brave. Essie was smart. Amber could write her name in script. Essie taught her. But Essie could read hard library books. Amber could tie her own shoes. Essie double tied them for her. Essie could thread a needle, cook toasted cheese sandwiches, make cocoa, put the lipstick on just right when they played dress up. Amber was brave. She could get the grocery man to trust them for a container of milk, though their mother couldn't pay him till payday. Amber wasn't afraid of the rat in the wall under the sink or of climbing in high places. Essie kept their house key in her little purse, but the front door to their building wouldn't even open unless they both pushed on it hard. Essie was tall and Amber was small. Essie was smart and Amber was brave. Essie and Amber, Amber and Essie. The question that always made Amber cry. Amber had a question worse than the meanest mosquito. That question never stopped buzzing right in her ear, right by her ear, especially in the early evening before their mother came home, when Amber had no one to play with, when Essie was deep in her library book, when Wilson the bear was somewhere under the bed. And even though Amber knew for sure that Essie would yell at her, never to ask that question again, the question's evil power forced Amber to pull Essie's hands from her ears and beg, tell me just one more time, Essie, where is Daddy? Essie shook Amber to make her memory work. Remember, we were in the kitchen when the cops came? Essie insisted. Remember, we saw them take Daddy down the stairs? Remember, we watched from behind the curtain till we couldn't find that cop car anymore? Remember how Mommy cried and then told us how Daddy lost his job, how Daddy needed money, how he forged the check, how he signed his boss's name, how the bank believed he really was the boss and gave him the money that wasn't even his? And that's how come forging a check is just the same as stealing. Well, it's not really stealing, Amber said, and Daddy is not bad. It is too stealing, as he told Amber, and it is very bad, and that's why the judge sentenced Daddy to jail. And even though Mommy says not to tell anyone, and even if you ask a million more times, it won't change it. Well, if you say that, you can't be my sister anymore, Amber said, and she wriggled away under the bed to find Wilson. And why is this book so important? Because the year that it came out, I could count on one hand the number of books that were relevant to this age group that had parents who were incarcerated. And what you're looking at on this slide are students from the school I taught in. And I read this book aloud to third and fourth graders that year. And one of my students came up to me. It takes 2 class sessions, in case you're wondering, it's not that long. Came up to me after the second class session and wanted to know if it was okay for him to tell me something. And I said, yeah, sure, anything. And he said, well, one, can I take that book home? I said, sure, you can take the book home. And two, my dad's in jail. And I'm telling you, no teacher, no psychologist, no nurse, no one in our school knew that he had an incarcerated parent, but he felt comfortable telling me, all because of Vera B. Williams. It was a given in her life that she would be frequently arrested at political protests and demonstrations, and she was quoted as saying that for her, there's an enduring connection between creative work and political activity. I don't make a point of ending up in jail, she said. But if you try to put your hopes and beliefs for a better life into effect, arrest is sometimes a hazard. She also illustrated adult work, including the poet and writer Grace Paley's Long Walks and Intimate Talks, a volume of poetry and stories. She illustrated calendars, raised funds for peace, anti-nuclear protests. And here we come to home at last. To the very last, she was telling the story that reflect a child's life, a child who needed a home, and two loving parents who just happened to be of the same sex. And Chris Roshka worked closely with Vera, going over illustrations and sketches and words. And our hopes and dreams were that she would be around for its publication. Vera Baker Williams had written, I've come to refer to the ethos of my childhood as bread and roses. I take this good smelling and good tasting phrase from the song. Do you remember that song we heard at the beginning? It's from Lawrence, Massachusetts textile mill workers strike. It was a major strike of 1912, violent protests, armed people. Kind of sounds familiar. The last lines are, our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Bread and roses, bread and roses. And this is one of her illustrations from the Grace Paley book, Worms, Peace, Plenty. Liz Levy, fellow Penn board member, said, among the many legacies Vera leaves us with is the mortal saying that potluck parties are proof that anarchy works. And if Vera was here, she would leave us with this. Make lots of pictures, play with colors, look at lots of pictures, daydream, imagine. And this is my favorite photograph of Vera B. Williams. by photographer Susan Kuklin. Questions?
If anyone has any questions, they can submit them now with the Q&A function. We'll give just a minute for in case anybody has a question they want to submit.
I got more to say about her. I just only had 40 minutes. That's cute. No questions.
Oh, did we just
Thank
get
you,
one?
Mary Parker. Wait a second. Did Vera have any connections with Minnesota? Hey, I don't think she had connections with Minnesota, but one of her last public appearances was at the Hamline University's MFA program for children, the Fine Arts Writing Program for Children. I don't know if you know this, but if you go to that program and you're in your last year and you're graduating, the graduating class picks the graduation speaker. And that year they picked Vera to be the speaker, and she took a train. She wanted to take a train. It's not that she didn't fly. She wanted to take a train across the United States. So she took a train from New York City to Minnesota. It took a very long time. Actually, I was lucky enough to spend some time with her, and I thought I actually miss children's literature. Thought we would spend the time talking about her art, talking about her work, and she spent 3 hours having breakfast in my home and discussing Black Mountain College with my husband Paul, who is a big fan of the work that came out of that college. And you could really see how it was just yesterday for her that that experience informed everything that she did.
We seem to have gotten quite a few questions come in, so we'll try and get to some of them. We may not get to all of them.
Okay, the free school free. I'm going to grab that. The free school wasn't free. There was tuition. I think it was like $400 and something a year for the students. And then there were some boarding students. The free part is about letting children be free to learn, that their education isn't from the top bottom. The education is motivated by what they wanted to learn and needed to learn for the things they were interested in.
We also had some people in the chat ask if there was ever any pushback on her books or attempts to censor them, in particular Home at Last, given
that's an interesting question. Vera B. Williams was part of the Penn children's section, and what Penn is an international group that people are imprisoned for the things that they're writing, and she believed strongly, severely, enthusiastically in a child's freedom to read. So if she received personal pushback for her books, I'm sure she just waved that baby away, that it was absolutely nothing. And she was not alive when the Rashka Williams book was published, but it was right around the time for the push for marriage equality and things like that. So she certainly had that in mind for a very long time before. When she was an adult, who did she live with or live alone? That's something I never really thought about. I do know in her later years, she was part of another intentional community of artists who lived together cooperatively.
And we've had a couple questions about both who influenced Vera and then what authors and artists were influenced by her.
Um, you know, it's something I would need more time to answer. I just it's but you certainly can see the influence of Ezra Jack Keats from the early 60s, of the child point of view, the use of color, um, but I couldn't tell you. She did go to the New York High School Music of Art. Yes, she did. LaGuardia, before it was LaGuardia. She absolutely did.
Let's see. We've had someone ask if most of her less famous books are still in print or not, if you know that.
You know what's not in print, which I love that I get to be at the curling collection and look at stuff. Um, the the um I've taken a blank on it. A couple of her early books from Parents Press are certainly not in print, and she did write in the front of it, not in print. This is like not in print anymore. So I want to thank Karen Nelson Hoyle, who had the forethought to collect these books, because those are the years that Karen Nelson Hoyle was collecting books of these works. And as you know, children's books are ephemera. They get used up, they get eaten up, they're sticky, they fall apart, and to have the complete works of Vera B. Williams in one place for researchers to look at is an amazing thing. If I could pick one of her books to be in every teacher's library, it would be Amber Was Brave and Essie Was Smart. And probably Chair for My Mother, but Chair for My Mother's pretty much a no-brainer. It's almost a perfect book. Amber Was Brave and Essie Was Smart. I remember the year it came out and going to bookstores to buy copies to give as gifts and not being able to find it. It was like a book emergency. And I think I went into a Barnes and Noble and they're like, oh no, we don't carry that book because it's poetry. We didn't know where to shelve it. Is it a picture book? Is it a middle grade novel? Is it this, is that? I mean, today we don't have that problem, but that's how on the forefront she was during the time that that was published.
Someone asked if you can see the MoMA painting.
No, I have been looking for it. So I'm assuming maybe if we're very, very lucky that Merce Williams, her son, is holding on to it somewhere, and maybe it will come to a public institution someday. And we did not get her archive. Karen Nelson Hoyle received certain gifts of materials. So we have fabulous sketches and manuscripts and a complete dummy for Scooter that wasn't even used, and some paintings, but we do not have her archive. There's no institution has her archive at this time.
And there's
I
also,
mean, we have some.
what kind of books do you think Vera would be doing if she were here now?
More. She would be doing more books. I can't read her mind. I think she would be looking for the bright light to share with children and their families. Though she lived through hard times and she wrote about hard times, if you read all of her books, she's not there to rehash trauma. She's there to show us how we can work for a better future.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. I think we got most of the questions answered.
Oh, a shout out to Bank Street. Yes, you did. Thank you, Bank Street.
All right. So thank you everybody for attending today. Please join us next month at the same time and same place, wherever you may be sitting, for a presentation from Marguerite Ragnow, curator of the James Ford Bell Library. And everyone have a very safe November and see everybody next month.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Dave.